if you have this moment where you had Tom Coburn, your conservative friend in the United States Senate, sign on to this deal. Judd Gregg was also on this thing. You had Dick Durbin, you're a good friend from Illinois. Democrats, everything you just described, and the answer to Chip and the answer to Ben just happened. Why not grab it?
The notion that it's been shelved, I think, is incorrect. It still provides a framework for a conversation. I mean, part of the challenge here is that this town, let's face it, you guys are pretty impatient. If something doesn't happen today, then the assumption is it's just not going to happen. Right? I mean, I've had this conversation for the last 2 years about every single issue that we worked on, whether it was health care or don't ask, don't tell, on Egypt, right? We've had this monumental change over the last 3 weeks. Well, why did it take 3 weeks? So I think that there's a tendency for us to assume that if it didn't happen today, it's not going to happen. Well, the Fiscal Commission put out a framework. I agree with much of the framework. I disagree with some of the framework. It is true that it got 11 votes, and that was a positive sign. What's also true, for example, is that the chairman of the House Republican budgeteers didn't sign on. He's got a little bit of juice when it comes to trying to get an eventual budget done. So he's got concerns. So I'm going to have a conversation with him. What would he like to see happen?
All right, gentlemen, you heard that. That was really painful. I saw it this morning. Listening to it again this evening is very, very painful. Senator Coburn, your name was mentioned by NBC's Chuck Todd. Isn't it clear, essentially, that President Obama has shelved the commission? The savings to spending and the deficit and debt are so much vastly greater in the Bowles-Simpson Commission than what is in Mr. Obama's budget, that how can anybody believe he hasn't shelved it?
Well, I don't think he shelved it, but I think the unfortunate thing is we've seen in New Jersey and New York that leadership really matters, and what we've had is him sending the first signal out to us is I'm ready to talk and here's my budget and I'm not jumping out there unless you guys jump with me. So I'm going to cut him a little slack on it right now. I would have much rather seen him come out with a $5 trillion or a $6 trillion fix over 10 years because that's where we got to get to. But I'm not going to be so hard on him as to say that it is shelved. I don't think it is, number one. And number two is he's playing the typical Washington game. I wished he would have just led, but I understand his apprehension about the political environment that we're in.
See, the Senator Warner, that's the thing. I wish you had led, according to what Tom is saying. But look, you can't walk the walk unless you put it inside the budget. The budget is the document. That's the operating document. That's the one that starts the conversation. Simpson-Bowles, which you favor, I know you told me during the State of the Union, you and Senator Chambliss are going to co-sponsor Simpson-Bowles with 20-some other senators. That thing would have taken $4 trillion, $4 trillion over 10 years out of the debt. The Obama budget takes a measly $400 billion. I don't get it, Senator Warner. How can you lead without leading?
Larry, I think if at the end of the day, the administration is not right in the middle of this longer-term fix, then I think you got an absolutely valid criticism. But, you know, I may be relatively new here, only 2 years, but there's an awful lot of back and forth. And if a group of us in the Senate can get out there with a real serious plan that's framed around the Deficit Commission, take some of those first arrows, and at the end of the day, we get this long-term fix in place that both lowers our deficit and makes our tax code competitive for the 21st century, you know, it may have to take some twists and turns, but I think it's much too early. And I agree with Tom on this, that, you know, we ought to give the president a little bit of a break here to see how this plays out.
Well, Senator Coburn, I don't know. You know, I was associate director of OMB years ago under President Reagan. You put your proposals on spending and taxing inside the budget. That's what the budget is for. And I don't understand why it wasn't in the budget. I mean, you've got, for example, $17 17.7 million unemployed and marginally attached workers. They are not working. This thing not only doesn't cut spending, it actually raises taxes by $1.5 trillion over 10 years, Senator Coburn. The Bowles-Simpson Commission had some very good pro-growth tax reform. I may not agree with all of it, but it was pretty darn good. Aren't they missing that, too? Didn't the president completely miss that? He went to the Chamber of Commerce. He talked tax reform, but it doesn't show up in the budget.
Well, agree. Larry, I agree with you. I would have loved to have seen a totally different performance from them. But I also would remind you that a president's budget hadn't gone anywhere in this country in a long time, and the budget that counts is the one that comes out of Congress. And he knows that, and he's not willing, I guess, right now to get out by himself to lead on these issues. And I think we're developing a pretty good bipartisan group of senators that are going to force his hand on that, and I think he'll come along. One of the statements he said today is about jumping in the boat. And the question is when does he jump in the boat? And I think he jumps in the boat when it's safe. Now, that's the opposite of leadership. What we need is the kind of leadership that Governor Cuomo and Governor Christie are given to their states to solve the very real issues in front of them. And so, again, I'm disappointed that he didn't do that, but he didn't. And so what's our obligation? Mark and my obligation is this country has tremendous problems in front of us. We can't let the politics of the past or the usual be an impediment to us coming together to solve these very critical problems. Otherwise, we're going to have a real disaster on our hands that we can't fix and will be mandated how we solve the problems.
I mean, Senator Warner, you know, the president said he didn't use a machete, he used a scalpel. Some people like me think he used a nail file. I mean, you've got a $6 billion budget savings in 2012 out of the $3.7 trillion budget. And then he sort of blames Paul Ryan, the House Budget Chairman for the Republicans. Mr. Ryan and company want to cut $100 billion from 2011. You know, that sums to huge amounts of money. Once again, where is this going? What is the message to the American people and the American economy that wants less spending, more growth, and less debt?
Well, I think, Larry, what we're going to give the administration a grade at the end of this process, and we'll see. I agree with Tom. It's not a question of if we're going to do deficit reduction. It's only a question of when. Are we going to do it on our terms in a way that's rational over a period of years, or the market's going to force it upon us with a sovereign debt crisis? That's the real choice. And I believe at the end of the day, we will get this done. I think the administration will have to be involved in it. The one thing I would also just echo is, and if part of our job is to try to help with our colleagues and others, you know, everybody wants a deficit reduction, but you, with the exception of Paul Ryan, you've not seen a whole lot of other folks say, let's go outside the defense domestic discretionary, which you and I and Tom knows only 12% of the budget. We got to take on entitlements. We got to take on tax reform. We got to take on defense. And some of this is just math. You know, 16 workers for every one retiree 60 years ago on Social Security. Now it's 3. It's not Democrat or Republican problem. It is just math. But I don't think the American public has that full understanding.
I mean, that's
part of our job.
Well, I hear you, Senator. I mean, there are all kinds of people ready to lengthen their retirement age, maybe to cut back a little bit on Social Security benefits. Certainly, reform of health care and Obamacare is on the table. Senator Coburn, when I listen to you, it sounds like Mr. Obama's budget is, in fact, dead on arrival. And what I want to ask you, Senator, is what happens next? If you don't have a document to work with, what happens next? Is there going to be some bipartisan meeting? Is there going to be some rehab of Bowles-Simpson? Maybe everybody has to caucus with those two guys and just let the White House go off on their own? Describe this process to me.
Well, first of all, let's talk about what the problem is. The American people right now understand we have a problem. They don't understand, I believe, yet the urgency and the critical nature of it. And one of the places where I think the president failed in both the State of the Union and with his budget is to describe how severe this problem is. When America understands that they have a problem, and it's uniform that everybody understands it, we bind together as a nation. When our backs get against the wall, we will come forward, and that will create the ability to do that. Now, what's the answer to it? We're going to have a budget, and you're going to see a budget come out of the House, and you're going to see a budget come out of the Senate, and those are going to have to get merged. Either that or we're going to run on CRs for 2012 as well. That's not a good thing for us to do. And so I think one of the things that we agree is we got to be able to give some path forward to the government as well as the American people on how we get out of this problem. So the sequence, no president budget has ever, since I've been in Congress, since 1994, the 6 years that I was here in the House and now the 6 years I've been in the Senate, no president's budget's ever been adopted. And this one president's budget isn't going to be adopted. It is a starting point in a negotiation process. And you know, I'm highly critical of a lot of this budget. It puts assumptions in there that are way too rosy. It puts tremendous tax increases at a time when we can't afford to raise taxes. It does a lot of things that just they won't pass the smell test. So it's kind of like Jack Lew said, you know, it's kind of the opening bid in the bridge game. And what we have to do is we have to, if the president ain't going to lead on this, what we've determined is bipartisan senators are going to lead to solve this problem.
All right, well, gentlemen, we'll leave it there. Senator Coburn, thank you. Senator Warner, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. All right, two good men, not too many answers yet. Anyway, next up, scary scenes coming out of the Middle East. Late break.